Noreen Fongmar called me a little before 5, as promised. Okie dokie, time to go. She wore now a long yellow cotton print dress with a Chinese collar. The skirt slit, with a braid at the sides, and looked far more exotic than when I had first met her. The meeting was in the golden stone building by the monastery gates. We gathered in a sizable room on the second floor, where Chris was already sitting by a table with Virginia Potier next to him. She smiled at me and patted the chair by hers. V tells me that you two had a good talk, Chris said. Yes, she showed me the schedule and helped fill me in. She had done far more than that, but I was embarrassed to say. She's so wonderful. Could I let her be wonderful and human too? Good. On the table by him was a pile of blue folders, and Noreen handed one to me. Here you are. One of our delegates is already here. Omeo Heno from Bakai. There are only 2 days a week when he can fly out, so he will be with us this weekend. I'm not sure where Bakai is, I said. Caharis answered. It's one of those numerous islands north of Australia. It's one of those numerous islands north of Australia. It used to belong to Australia, and there are still many Britishers there in supervisory positions. Omeo is in his mid-20s and very talented. Noreen added, his English is considerably better than that of many of the delegates, and he devours books as we send them to him. He works in adult education, not an easy job as the level of literacy is still very low on Bakai. Virginia Portier suggested, perhaps the Australians wanted to keep it low, educate them and they'll cause trouble. Caharis smiled, shaking his head. That's too facile. However, Omeo got into considerable difficulty all round when he insisted that the native women be allowed to learn to read and write. He ran into walls of prejudice, but he finally got his coeducational classes. When Omeo sees something as right, he won't stop till he gets it. He's quite a lad. He paused as we heard heavy footsteps, and a large, dark-skinned woman came in. Caharis and Noreen rose to greet her, and she kissed them both, then came to shake hands with Virginia Portier and me. Chris introduced us. Milka, Ada, Zinda, our storytelling expert, Millie. V is our writing workshop leader. The large woman, wide rather than tall, smiled. Yes, I know Miss Polchier's work. She spoke with an accent which was partly guttural, partly French. I couldn't place it. We're lucky to have you. Thanks, I'm lucky to be here, and I'm V, please. That's home in Cameroon. In the college where I teach, it's called M.A. Milka Ada, Zenda said. Caharis calls me Millie. I like that. Millie, then, Virginia Portier said. M.A., how ironic. I was glad we were going to call her Millie. I did not need to be reminded of Minerva Allaire. Milka Ada's hand clasp was firm and dry despite the heat. When she sat down, the chair creaked under her, but she exuded calm and comfort. She wore a loose cotton shift and space shoes. Polly is going to help V in her workshop, Caharis said. Be with Noreen in the office and do all kinds of odd jobs. If you need special errands run, that's one of the things Polly is here for. I'm not much for running myself. Millie bathed me with her smile, which was not a quick flash, but a slow spreading of appreciation. I decided that I'd be happy to run anywhere from Milka, Ada, Zenda, and that I would like to be young enough to climb in her lap. The fact that she came from Cameroon explained her accent. Cameroon used to be French. I liked her voice, which had a deep quality to it, like the night sky at home at Benny Seed, when it was warm and the stars are blurred. When it is warm and the stars are blurred. We heard more feet on the stairs, and 2 people came into the room. One was a woman, black, though a darker, more purpley black than Millie, and tall, much taller than I am. She wore a loose robe of brown with a pattern of rust and black and a turban, which made her seem even taller than she was, and she looked formidable. Behind her came a man who surprised me simply because he looked so ordinary, like my father or my uncles, or anybody I might meet at home. He had brownish hair with a touch of mahogany, not red, just warm and nice eyes. They reminded me of Sandy's. Caharis made the introductions. The immensely tall woman was Bashimath Ogda. was Bashimeth Odega, and she came from Kenya. It was easy to think of Milka Ada as Millie, but I couldn't conceive of giving Bashimeth any kind of nickname. Millie said, glancing at her folder, "You're the expert in childhood education." "That sounds very impressive," Bashimeth said. "It's what I teach and what I care about." "And this is Frank Rowan," Karis continued. "He's the publisher of a small educational press in Istanbul, and he will give the delegates hints on starting their own presses. Difficult, but not impossible." Bashimeth Odega and Frank Rowan evidently knew each other, because Bashimeth said, "We're running a small independent press, thanks to Frank. We're constantly on the edge of bankruptcy, but that's not Frank's fault." Her voice was deep, more guttural than Millie's. Karis introduced me to a colleague, not just a kid who'd been... Karis introduced me as a colleague, not just a kid who'd been given a chance to be a gopher. Everybody was on a first-name basis, as Virginia Portier had said, and I understood I'd have to get over my hesitancy. Would I ever feel really comfortable calling Virginia Portier V? But already I felt so close to her that Mrs. or Madame Portier sounded not only formal, but unfriendly. Karis called the meeting to order. I liked him. I trusted him. Though I tried to remind myself that trusting people is dangerous. I watched him with his coffee-colored skin and dark, grieving eyes, but no self-pity in the lines that moved downward, and I knew that Max loved him and that he loved Max, and that there was a lot about human relations I didn't understand, and that maybe I was going to have to move through a lot of time before I was going to be able to understand. Millie kept wiping her face with a large handkerchief. Bashimeth fanned herself regally with an odd-looking fan of ivory and feathers. Frank Rowan kept pushing his spectacles back up his nose, a gesture which reminded me of nearsighted Rennie. If it had not been for the sea breeze coming in the arched windows, the heat would have been unbearable. The walls of the room were the same sun-soaked stone that was found almost everywhere in the old part of the monastery grounds. Karis discussed the schedule and explained that he would like us all to be at all the workshops to encourage and support the delegates. "Your presence is important to the morale of the group." Then he smiled and told us that it was nearly time for supper, and that there would be fresh lemonade in the cloister while we waited for the meal. Noreen whispered to me, Wait just a minute, Polly. I'd like to take you down to the office and show you how to use the Mimeo machine. V and Bashimeth both have some things they'd like you to run off." Karis and Millie went out together, followed by Virginia Portier. Bashimeth turned to Frank, and I heard her mutter in a dark whisper, "If Karis throws one of his ecumenical religious services, he can count me out. I'm here for early childhood education, period." I couldn't hear Frank's murmured response because Noreen was buzzing. "Fresh lemonade is even more of a treat here than wine. It's not the lemons. There are plenty of those, but the bottled water, which is an expensive luxury." Then she called to Frank and Bashimeth. "Be careful on the steps, okie dokie. They've been worn down through the centuries, and they're slanting and slippery." "Right-o," Frank called back, and I noticed that he was limping. I followed Noreen down the steps and into the office, which was a small room on the first floor. "Do you know how to type?" she asked. "I'm slow, but I can do it if I take enough time." "Have you ever typed a stencil?" She handed me a sheet of purpley carbon-like paper. "No, we have a photocopy machine at school. You Americans take for granted a lot of luxuries the rest of the world can't even contemplate. When you type a stencil, you have to be careful because you can't correct mistakes. Here's some stuff V would like to hand around to the delegates. You don't have to run it off now. There isn't time before dinner. Tomorrow morning, okie dokie?" "Sure." Then I asked, "Why does Frank limp?" "He lost a leg a few years ago. He and his wife were taking their children to the United States so they could go to high school there. And as they were driving to New York to fly back to Turkey, they were in a terrible automobile accident, and his wife was killed and Frank lost a leg." "How awful." "Funny games fate plays," Noreen said. "Frank spent most of his life in the tinderbox of the Middle East, but tragedy hits him when it's least expected. In the safe United States, His children are all in college now. The eldest graduates next year. So Frank was probably a little older than my parents, but I'm not good about chronology. Noreen showed me how to work the Mimeo machine, once I'd done the stencil. How are you coming on the beds? She asked me. I've done quite a few. The staff members have already done theirs, of course. You can tell the staff rooms because the names are on the doors. She pulled the tissue from a box on her desk and wiped her forehead. Lemonade? I'm ready, I said. I was parched. I followed her out of the hot box of the office. Across the compound, a breeze was blowing from the sea. In the cloister, a table was covered with a blue and white cloth. It was on the Mediterranean side of the long walkway, where open arches gave onto vistas of the village and the sea. A young man stood by a small table on which there was a large pitcher and a tray of glasses. I bear refreshment for your thirst on this island, which is welcoming us as warmly as my island of Bakai. I am Omeo Eno. His voice was warm and rhythmic, his speech slightly over-precise. He poured me some lemonade. Omeo turned to me. Chris wrote me that you would be here all the way from the United States and so young. Don't rub it in, I thought. I took the glass he handed me. I'm nearly 17. He looked very young himself, mid-20s, Chris had said, like Rennie. He smiled, showing perfect white teeth. His skin was so dark that it was a surprise when light brought out copper glints. His palms were pale pink, and so were the soles of his feet, showing a rim of pink between foot and sandal. His hair was fine and black, curling softly. He moved like a dancer, and Noreen, who was to become my great source of information, told me later that one of the special pleasures I had to look forward to was Omeo performing some of the traditional Bakian dances. And blue eyes, so beautiful, he said, like the first blue of the sky after sunrise on a fine day. I could feel the telltale blush. I had been given more cause to blush since I flew to Athens than in all the time on Beniceid Island and at Cowpertown High. Thank you. And then, how long did it take you to get here? His smile widened into even more brightness. It was the kind of smile some people might have used to show off, but with Omeo it seemed pure, spontaneous delight. Now he burst into a laugh and pointed at his wristwatch. Time got changed on me so many times. Low back, low forth. I don't know how long it has taken. A jeep, a bus, a train, 4 planes, 2 buses, and here I am. I smiled back. You speak very good English. I spent a year in London working with Chris. I was given a scholarship, and lo, I learned more than in the rest of my life. Though we have many English-speaking people on Bakai, more almost than Bakaians. I learned also in London that I do not like English weather, and that Bakai is my home, and although we Bakaians are thought of as primitive, we also have old wisdom. I work hard to teach people to read, to write, and most importantly to think, so that we will know how to hold on to the old wisdom and not let it degenerate into superstition. I am writing down the stories of my people, how the world began and is held up on the spout of a great whale. I'd love to see what you've written. His smile shone again. One day, then, I will show you. When we knew each other a little better, I thought the one day meant. Chris called us to the table, and we stood around it holding hands the way we do at home. Holding hands around the table is the best way to keep the little kids quiet, but there's more to it than that, and I liked holding Virginia Poitier's hand on my right, Omeo's on my left. Chris suggested, Saranam? I did not know what he meant, and evidently neither did Virginia Poitier, but the others lifted up their voices to sing in beautiful harmony. Receive our thanks for night and day, for food and shelter. Rest and play, be here our guest, and with us stay. Saranam, Saranam, Saranam. It was beautiful. 2 Cypriot women standing in the background beamed and nodded appreciation. We pulled out our chairs and sat down. There was a big pitcher of water on the table and another of red wine. Chris poured some of the wine into his glass and filled it with water. I'm afraid the wine is rather rough and the water is salty. Mixed together, they are quite potable. He took out a large white handkerchief and patted his brow, although he did not look hot. This is an unusual heat wave, and I have become acclimated to England. Omeo smiled at him. In England, I froze. Lo, into the very marrow! This is like home. Noreen passed around a basket of bread. You may find this a little sour, but it is baked fresh every day and is very good. They do not serve butter except at breakfast, okie dokie. She indicated 2 small dishes. This bread is made from olives, and this from cucumber. Very good on the bread. She nodded at me, and I helped myself and passed the dishes to Virginia Potier. V. I would have to start thinking of her as V. A platter of what looked like onion rings was passed around. It is octopus, Noreen explained. It is a little rubbery, but quite tasty. One of the Cypriot women passed the platter to Virginia V., who helped herself. Efaristo, Tulia. Fortunately, I'd eaten octopus before, though not at home. I watched Millie take a tentative taste and try not to make a grimace. Frank Rowan, living in Istanbul, was obviously used to it and helped himself lavishly. Bashemuth took a middle-sized helping and looked gravely at me. Why should eating octopus be worse than eating shrimp or any other kind of fish? As I ate mine, I thought of Ursula and Daddy and Denny's and their mutual interest in the octopus because of its nervous system. The sour bread was good, and so was the bowl of salad Tulia brought us. I drank half a glass of mixed wine and water. For dessert, we had fruit. This is simple, typical Cypriot fare, Chris said. But to me it is enjoyable. After Tulia and her younger helper, her name is Sophonisba, Virginia Potier whispered to me. Had cleared the table, refusing to let us help. Chris suggested that we stay out in the cloister and catch the breezes. And we should teach V and Polly some of our songs. We will do a lot of singing together, and many of the delegates will look at you to help them with songs they are not familiar with. Saranam, Omeo said, and turned his smile on me. It is an Indian song Kahis brought to us, but we have made many of our own verses. Sing a verse through for us, Kahis suggested. With no self-consciousness, Omeo lifted up his voice. For this small earth of sea and land, for this small space on which we stand, for those we teach with heart and hand, Saranam, Saranam, Saranam. He sang it until we all had it memorized, the words and the melody, and then dropped his voice to a rich bass accompaniment. Millie lifted hers in a descant. It was piercingly, painfully beautiful, almost too beautiful. I ached with unshed tears. Bashemuth said suddenly, Here's one we all know, and it will be good for us to hear it in the various languages of the delegates. I wasn't quite sure what I expected, but I was totally surprised when in her smoky voice she sang Silent Night in Maasai. She sounded both tender and formidable. When she had finished, she bowed to Frank Rowan. I'll sing it in Turkish, Frank said. Although the words were foreign, he still sounded very American. I'll sing it in Turkish, Frank said. Although the words were foreign, he still sounded very American. Then he bowed to Noreen. The familiar words sounded strange in Chinese, pitched rather higher than we were accustomed to, and with a gentleness I had not felt before in Noreen. Then came Omeo, with his voice like black velvet. The Bacchaean words coming out softly, like an ancient lullaby. It was amazing how different the same song could sound. I'd been bored with Silent Night from overexposure, so I could no longer even hear it, and suddenly, in this hot, late September night, in a cloister, in Osaya Thiola, with the breeze barely stirring, it was alive and new. I listened to Omeo sing and felt tears come to my eyes, and looked at V, and she was blowing her nose. I wondered what memories the familiar carol brought to her, and to the others of the staff. What was Christmas like in Kenya, Cameroon? For me, the familiar memory brought back Mother baking Christmas cookies with all of us, even the littlest ones helping, hindering her, and the smell of turkey and stuffing and childhood, when my parents were Olympian, and their love could solve all problems and keep us safe, and there was nothing on earth I couldn't talk to them about. I looked around the circle of people. Faces were unguarded, and when I saw Millie put her hands over her face. I turned away quickly, feeling that I was violating her privacy, and my glance fell on Frank Rowan, and his eyes were bright with tears, and I turned away again, wondering if he was remembering Christmas when his children were little and his wife was alive. I looked at Noreen, who sat with her hands tightly clenched in her lap, her eyes closed, no longer the efficient leader, but a woman with her own memories, her own griefs. I had not lived long enough to have learned the coming to terms with life, which I felt from those people. But I thought of New Year's Eve at Boulaire, when everything had been as shining and beautiful as the Christmas tree, and we had sung carols and played charades, and champagne was sparkling and didn't hurt anyone. But now I hurt, and I couldn't get out on the other side of that hurt. V said, and it was Silent Night that was helping me to think. And was it Silent Night that was helping me to think of her as V? Polly, can you sing it in German? I nodded and started. Stille Nacht, Heilige Nacht. And while I was singing, there were no memories, nothing but the song for these people who were already becoming close to me. Carisse said, when I was through, sing it in French, V. Millie, you'll use one of the native dialects? Millie nodded, and V sang in French. When she was through, Millie lifted her voice in her clear soprano as easily and joyously as a bird. Everybody had sung at least reasonably well. Nobody flatted or swooped or sang nasally, but Millie's voice was extraordinary, and we were mesmerized. She sang with a complete lack of self-consciousness. I had thought I had the tears well under control, but the pure effortlessness of Millie's singing made me choke up, and the tears slipped down my cheeks. I got up quietly and went to one of the open arches and stood looking at moonlight, making a wide path on the sea. Then jumped down from the high sill to the sand below, walking until I came to an ancient-looking tree shadowing the remnants of a wall. I stepped into its darkness and sobbed. An arm came around my shoulders, and I was drawn to a lean, masculine body, smelling a musky, pungent smell. It was Omeo. I'm sorry, I gasped. It's all right, Lo. Many of us have brought wounds with us, and Millie's singing opened them and brought healing tears. Do you have a handkerchief? Omeo's presence stilled the storm of tears. I dug in my pocket and found a tattered piece of Kleenex. I'm sorry. It's all right. Noreen has provided punch and macaroons, and we'd better get back before we are missed. When we got back to the cloister, everybody was drinking punch from tiny paper cups and munching macaroons. Nobody mentioned my absence. Carisse asked, You like to sing, Polly? Does your family enjoy it? We love it. We used to sing more when we were all littler and had less housework. But when there are 9 people in a family, singing is something everybody can do. Noreen said, You have a nice voice, Polly. Well, we are working in the office tomorrow. You can do some singing as well. V announced that she was going for a swim, and did anybody want to come? Sorry, Frank said. The walk's a bit much for my inanimate leg. Not tonight for me, V, Carisse said. Now you will find other swimming partners, but I beg all of you and ask you to emphasize it to the delegates. Do not go alone. There are strong tides and undertows, but the water is refreshing and the walk at night will not be too hot. Only Omeo and I wanted to go. I was used to all kinds of undertows, and I felt sticky, and the idea of a swim at night in the Mediterranean was enticing. It had grown dark while we were singing, and suddenly, the sudden subtropical dark I was used to on Benecide. V said, Carisse is right that we should stick together. Polly and I live next door to each other at the far end of the dormitory building. Let's meet just outside the laundry umbrella, and I'll show you the way. Omeo told us that he was on the 2nd floor. He'd be ready in 2 minutes. Make it 10, V said. It didn't take me more than a couple of minutes to get into my suit, so I went out the back door of the building and walked toward the laundry umbrella, which was like an empty tree, with 1 pair of bathing trunks, probably Carisse's, hanging from a single leaf. When everybody arrived, it would fill up. As I stepped toward it, my foot slid out of my thong, and I stepped on a pebble. A sudden pain shot up my leg, just like the sharpness of a broken seashell sliced into my foot as I was running away from Boulaire. And we'll pause.